Good evening everybody and welcome to this session for the English language. If you've been part of our previous sessions, you know that we've been looking at spot the error question type specifically, right? We've covered 16 error types so far, and there are 9 more error types to go because we have a total of 25 error types, right? So as per your request or on demand, we are continuing to focus on spot the error today as well, and hopefully today would be the last day where we look at spot the error, but I'm sure with this particular concept, because spot the error helps in a lot more error types, and we get to learn some more concepts like there are errors pertaining to collocations, phrases, which is that's our question. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds and see if you are able to identify where the error is and what the error is. Hardly the scooter had started when something went wrong with the engine. So in terms of hardly, right, we know when a sentence begins with hardly, you always have to look for the construction. Hardly when, and another one is no sooner than. We know this, right? So if I'm looking at that, it seems correct, right? When is the right thing to go with hardly as in terms of construction. But where actually is the error? The error is in part A. Why? Because when a sentence begins with these negative adverbs like hardly, scarcely, what happens is, and when they're at the beginning of the sentence, the subject should be placed after the helping verb. So basically what happens is, I need to again change the word order. So it will be hardly had the scooter started, right? So my subject follows the helping verb. It is placed after the helping verb and not before. Hardly had the scooter started when something went wrong with the engine. That's correct, right? So these are word order errors where we're changing the order of the context. Got it? So error is in part A. Let's move on. Let's look at another one. Same concept, word order. Let's see if you're able to identify the error. Chatting on the internet with people only not helps us make friends, but also increases our knowledge. This is an easy one because as soon as you read it, you can figure out that this is the part that's sounding awkward. So basically it is chatting on the internet with people. All I have to do is just bring this not before, right? Not only helps us make friends, but also we know the construction, not only but also. So pretty easy, this one is not difficult at all, right? Part B is where the error is. I just interchange not and bring it before only to maintain the correlative conjunction, not only but also. Chatting on the internet with people not only helps us make friends, but also increases our knowledge. So the errors that we've looked at so far, right, is pertaining to word order. Okay, we're going to move to the next error type. I'm going to project the next question. Let's look at this. Modi has surprised many by investing considerable political capital in high-powered diplomacy as early in his term, even though he came to office with little foreign policy experience. Long sentence, but nevertheless, where do you think the error is? Yeah, understand the context meaning also, so you will be able to identify where the error is. Again, I'm not too sure if you have been able to identify the error, but I'm just going to go ahead and brainstorm the answer. Discuss the answer. So if you look at the context, basically the context is saying Modi has surprised many by investing considerable political capital in high-power diplomacy as early in his term, even though he came to office with little foreign policy experience. So basically what is the context saying? It's saying, he didn't have much of a foreign policy experience, but still he was able to invest considerable political capital in high-powered diplomacy very early in his term, right? As soon as he took up that responsibility, or he was given that position, even though he did not have relevant experience, he was still able to implement something quite early in his term, right? Which means, if you look at the context, it says as early. It's almost like a positive degree, and almost as the as is missing after early, right? As early as, but that's not the meaning we want. There is no comparison happening here. It's like an incomplete positive degree phrase. So what I need is, I need an intensifier telling me or emphasizing the fact that even though he did not have enough experience, he still went ahead and was able to implement something quite early in his term. So early in his term. Are you getting the point? So as is an incorrect word here. What I need is either, quite or so early in his term. I need an intensifier which is emphasizing, for emphasis, emphasizing the fact that even though he did not have relevant experience, he was still able to implement something quite early in his term, so early in his term. Are you getting it? So this is an error pertaining to intensifiers, right? I need a word which brings in that meaning where there is emphasis on the fact that though, right? I mean, even though is a clue phrase for us, in fact, an antonym clue phrase explaining the whole meaning of the context. Yeah? Let's see if you're able to identify some more errors pertaining to intensifiers. The students ran out of the classroom so soon as the bell rang. This one, if you notice, it's just the opposite of what we looked at in the previous context, right? Because here, the context is more referring to time, right? The earlier context, we deleted as and we replaced it with so. Here, what we need to do is just the opposite, right? The error is in part C, where we delete so and replace it with as, because the expression that I need in this context is as soon as. Why? Because the emphasis is on that one event happened immediately after the other, right? So the bell rang, then the students ran out. So it is the emphasis or the focus is on, let's say the context is indicating that one event happened immediately after the other, right? The bell rang, the students ran out, right? So the emphasis is here. So this is like an inappropriate intensifier here. I don't need so here, right? It doesn't bring the meaning or the emphasis that the context is trying to express. So the students ran out of the classroom as soon as the bell rang would be correct. So we replace so with as. Yeah. Let's move on to the next question type. Milk has become very much dear owing to the summer season. Where do you think the error is? Okay, so let's brainstorm. Milk has become very much dear owing to the summer season. So when I'm reading it, I know there is an unnecessary intensifier here in part B, right? This very is not required at all, right? Because milk has become much dear owing to the summer season, meaning it is more in demand, or people are consuming more of milk. The reason being it's summer season. So I don't need that very, which is, it's like double emphasis, not required, right? It's an unnecessary intensifier there. See, for example, a lot of us actually use very much in different contexts, like thank you very much, right? That's one context. It's a standard phrase, which is fine. But instead of saying, everything you want is much closer than you think, right? I don't have to say everything you want is very much closer than you think. That very in that context is unnecessary. Let me put down some example sentences so you're able to follow when I don't need an intensifier in the context, because the context by itself is giving or providing the required emphasis. Let me put down the same example that I said. Everything you want is much closer than you think, right? So the fact that much is there itself is bringing in that emphasis. Yeah. So I don't need everything you want is very much closer than you think. This very is inappropriate here. Right? Just to give you other examples, I can say God is much closer than you think, or than you know, right? I don't need God is very much closer than you know. I don't need two words emphasizing the same point or the same meaning or bringing in the same, expression in the context. Are you following? So that's why the error is in part B, where we delete very. Yeah, we're done with intensifiers. So the error type that we looked at, the last couple of example sentences, are pertaining to intensifiers, right? So we understand when there is an unnecessary intensifier, We also understand when there is an incorrect intensifier based on the meaning that the context is bringing in. Let's move to our next error type. Let me see if you're able to identify that error type. This is the question. As per Dr. Verma, there is a little hope of his recovery now. Were you able to identify the error? And if you look at it, the context is talking more, it's expressing more, it's like almost they've lost hope that this person is going to recover, right? So as per Dr. Verma, the fact that, there's only little hope of his recovery now, and if you're paying attention, you know that the error is in part C, right? Why? Because the meaning, the context meaning is negative. How do we know that? Little hope, his recovery, little hope of his recovery now, right? Which means there is not much. That's the meaning it's bringing, right? Not much hope, which means I need to delete this indefinite article a, right? So little hope would be correct and not a little hope, because when you say a little, it's almost like nothing is completely lost. There is, if not too much, at least there is something, right? That's the meaning. A little has a little positive meaning, but when you say little, so if I say there is little money left, which means there's hardly any money left, right? We can't afford to spend lavishly or extravagantly. We need to watch our spending limit. Just to give you a random example. Yeah, so keep that in mind. So in the context, the error is in part C, where we remove that indefinite article a, because that gives a positive meaning, but whereas the context meaning is negative, implying that there is hardly or not much hope left of this person recovering. So that's why you delete the indefinite article a. Let's move on. Let's look at the next one. There were no less than 40 boys in the class when this happened. There were no less than 40 boys in the class when this happened. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds. That's all the time you get. Let's see if you're able to identify where the error is. Okay. So that was longer than I said I would give you. Let's look at this question. There were no less than 40 boys. There's a clue word in this phrase. Are you able to identify the clue word? The clue word is 40 boys, right? Which means we are referring to something that can be countable. And remember, when you're talking about something that is countable, what we need here is what? Not less, right? Because we know that less is usually or mostly used with uncountable nouns, right? Or singular mass nouns. So, for example, I can say I don't say please put less salt. I mean, I say please put less salt. I don't say please put fewer salt, right? I can't count the salt. Or I can say, I have less money. I don't say I have fewer money. So when I'm talking about singular mass nouns, uncountable nouns like money, what can I say? Nouns like honesty, truth, love, right? So there is less truth in what you're saying. I don't say there is fewer truth in what you're saying. Are you following? So here, because we're talking about a countable factor, 40 boys, the right quantifier would be fewer, right? There were no fewer than 40 boys in the class. That's what we need. So let's make that change. So the error is in part A, right? Change less to fewer. Why? Because the clue is the 40 boys, which is a countable noun, right? Are you following? So just for example, I can say less salt, less money, less truth, yeah, less love, yeah. I can't say fewer salt, fewer money, fewer truth, fewer love. Are you following? But what I can say is fewer, anything that is countable, fewer cats, fewer people, fewer rupees, right? Anything that is countable. Fewer ingredients. Are you following? That's the difference between fewer and less. And here, because it's countable, so this is uncountable singular mass nouns, and these are countable nouns. Okay, so far the last two example sentences that we looked at is pertaining to quantifiers, right? I need the right quantifier. So many, much, fewer, less, a little, right? These are all quantifiers that tell me, refer to the subject, right? What is the subject? Is it countable or is it uncountable, right? What sort of a meaning is it bringing, right? Is it bringing a positive or a negative meaning? So I need to be familiar with these quantifiers and when to use what, so that I'm able to identify errors pertaining to quantifiers. We're going to move to the next question, which is this: computers are useless unless you don't know how to use them. Computers are useless unless you don't know how to use them. Where do you think the error is? Okay, so if you look at this context, right, you can clearly, your clue word is unless, which means except if, right? It always brings in a condition. So after the condition, they are saying computers are useless. Already there is a negative meaning here, right? So unless, meaning the exception being, you have to know how to use them, right? So when you know how to use them, then it's no longer useless. That's the meaning, which means the error in part C, right? And I need to delete this don't, because I can't have two parts giving me a negative meaning, right? Computers are useless is already negative, and then I have the clue word unless, which means except if you know how to use them. That's the correct meaning, right? That completes meaning logically in the context. So the error is in part C. As soon as we delete don't, then the entire context makes sense. So now I say computers are useless unless, except if you know how to use them, right? This is our correct phrase completing meaning. So these are errors pertaining to double negatives, right? Where I need to look at the context closely and understand, are there parts which are giving me the same, like already I have the part A expressing a negative meaning, and then again I have part C which is again expressing a negative meaning, which just doesn't make the sentence logically correct, right? I need to identify that sort of a concept, which is nothing but double negatives, right? And then remove the one which is incorrect in terms of expressing negative meaning, which in our case is part C here in this context, and then the sentence is correct. So let's look at another one. The sun hadn't hardly set when the mosquitoes began to sting so annoyingly that we had to run off from the playground. The sun hadn't hardly set when the mosquitoes began to sting so annoyingly that we had to run off from the playground. Where do you think the error is? Yeah, if you pay attention, again our clue word in part A is hardly, right? Error is in part A. Why so? Because hardly itself means what? Not much, right? Or barely, or slightly, or almost not, right? These are the meanings of hardly, or only just, right? So hardly itself expresses negative meaning, which means I don't need this had not, no? So what I need to change is, hadn't is nothing but the contracted form of had not. So what I need to do is I need to remove this not, and then I change the part to the sun had hardly set when the mosquitoes. So if I have to rephrase this entire sentence, I'll say hardly had the sun set, right? There are cases where these negative adverbs like hardly and scarcely even come in the middle of the sentence, like this context, but nevertheless, right, hardly had the sun set when the mosquitoes began to sting. If I had to rephrase the context, that's how it will be, right? So I don't say hardly had not the sun set, because hardly itself brings in that meaning, right? Barely, almost not, only just. Yeah, so remember, double negatives. Anything that is giving me negative meaning twice, which is nothing but double negatives, right? I'll have to look for those errors and pick the right answer. Let's move to the next question. When your father inquired about your marks, you lied to him. Have you not? I mean, what sort of a error do you think this question has? When your father inquired about your marks, you lied to him. Have you not? Obviously, this is pertaining to question tags, right? I mean, look at the context. As soon as you read the context, you know it's pertaining to question tags. But is the tag correct? When your father inquired about your marks, you lied to him. Would it be have you not or something else? The answer will be didn't you, right? Not have you not. So the error is in part 3. The right question tag is didn't you. Why? Because if I have to rephrase this question, I would say you did lie to your father when he inquired about your marks. Didn't you? Right? That's the right tag, not have you not. Because I can't rephrase the context to he has lied. That's the fact, right? So when your father inquired about your marks, you lied to him. So you did lie to your father when he inquired about your marks, didn't you? So the right question tag to follow is not have you not, but didn't you. So again, this is error pertaining to question tags. We have to look at the context and then figure out what will be the appropriate question tag that follows. Let's look at our next question. The officer, along with his family members, was invited to the reception party organized by his employer. The officer, along with his family members, was invited to the reception party organized by his employer. Where do you think the error is? See, if you look at subject verb agreement, we know that along with his family members is just a, additional information, prepositional phrase. The officer is the subject. So was as a verb is correct. So it's not subject verb agreement error. But where else is the error? Yes, the error is in part 2. Why? Because I have an unnecessary word there bringing in the same meaning. Either I can say invited to the reception or invited to the party, right? I can't have both these words together. I can't have reception and party. The reception itself can be a party, right? The party, whatever the party is, it can be called as a reception. So what I'm trying to say is when there are two words bringing in the same meaning, I need to be able to identify that there is superfluous meaning there. When I say superfluous, unnecessary word in the context, which has the same meaning. So these are errors pertaining, these are superfluous errors, right? Word that brings in same meaning. So I either delete reception or party. Either one you have. Can't have both. So basically, the corrected sentence will be the officer along with his family members was invited to the reception organized by his employer, or the officer along with his family members was invited to the party organized by his employer. Reception party, incorrect. Okay, let's look at the next one. We think him as a silly boy. Where do you think the error is? It's a short sentence, but see if you're able to identify where the error is. Were you able to identify the error? Basically, the error is in part B. Okay. Why? Because this as is unnecessary here. We think him a silly boy. Not we think him as a silly boy. So what you need to remember is verbs like consider, think, call, etc. are not followed by as. Let's look at some example sentences to understand this, okay? So for example, I can say, we consider them our friends. We consider them our friends. Not we consider them as our friends. Incorrect. Yeah? Are you following? Or for that matter, even think. Right? Think is already there in our context, but we can still look at it. Right? Just to give you a context, I can say, we had to think what to do. Next, not this is correct, not we had to think as what to do next, incorrect. Alright, okay. See, I'll give you another word in terms of the same construction, right? I can say, yeah, so basically remember this, okay? Consider, think, call, all of these does not take up as after it, right? Let's look at one example for calls as well, since we've covered think and consider. So I can say, she calls me lazy and selfish. Okay, correct. Not she calls me as lazy and selfish. Incorrect. Okay, yeah. Now that we've clarified that, let's move on. Our housing society comprises of 8 blocks and 48 flats in an area of about 1000 square meters. So, where do you think the error is? This is not a new expression. We've looked at this expression earlier as well. Yeah, if you pay close attention, you know that the error is in part A. Why? Because I have an unnecessary preposition here, which is of, right? Because comprises itself means consists of, right? So remember, something that brings in same meaning, I need to identify that part and delete the unnecessary word. Again, it's an error pertaining to, it's superfluous in nature. Of is unnecessary there. A housing society comprises means consists of 8 blocks and 48 flats in an area of about 1000 square meters. There's nothing wrong in D. 1000 square meters is absolutely correct. Or if you're looking at, about as a preposition being incorrect, no, that's also fine. Because about brings in the meaning of approximately, right? Of about 1000 square meters. Absolutely correct. The error is in part A, where I have to delete of. Because comprises itself means consists of. Superfluous in meaning. So all of these previous 3 example sentences we've looked at, right? Like when I have verbs like consider, think, call, I don't need as to follow. As is unnecessary, superfluous, out. Likewise, when there are 2 words bringing in the same meaning, in an example that we saw, reception party, use either one. Don't use both, right? Superfluous. Likewise, comprises of is a very common error pertaining to superfluous meaning. I don't need that of, because comprises itself means consists of. Let's move to our next error type. We had a nice play of football and badminton today. Where is the error? As soon as you read it, you'll know that, this particular part is sounding very awkward. Can you identify that part? Let's see. But let's look at the context, right? We had a nice play of football and badminton today. So here, if you look at it, the context is referring to 2 things, which is football and badminton. What are those? Will you? If I have to define them, what will I say? What will I call them? I will not say a football play, right? Or I will not say a badminton play. I would say a football game. I would say a badminton game. We had a nice game of football and badminton today. So the error, my friend, is in part C, where it is an incorrect word choice. Yeah? I don't need, so I have to replace or change play to game, because this is the right word choice when I'm referring to these 2 games, football and badminton. So the error is not in B. Okay? The error is definitely not in D. But the error is in C. We had a nice game. Right? Is fine as it is. The indefinite article is absolutely fine. Yeah? So it's like saying we had a nice time with a couple of friends at my house last night. We had a good time. Right? So in the context, we had a nice game of badminton. So incorrect word choice, vocabulary, right? This is an incorrect word choice, error pertaining to vocabulary, something that we looked at earlier. This is not a new error type for us. Let's see if you're able to identify the next 2. As the experiences of other countries have shown, an ailing financial sector can very quickly wreck the entire economy. Where is the error in this one? Were you able to identify the error? Okay, chalo, let's look at it. As the experiences of other countries have shown, an ailing financial sector can do what? Can very quickly wreck the entire economy. What is the meaning of render and wreck? To render means to provide, right? And is the context giving us a positive meaning or a negative meaning first of all? Let's understand the words first. Render means to either provide or give. Something that makes something happen, or something that it becomes. So for example, I can say the rains rendered his escape impossible. So in this context, what I'm trying to say is, because of the rains, it made his escape impossible. He wasn't able to escape, right? The cause or the reason. Are you following? So in the context, it is saying an ailing financial sector. Ailing matlab? What is the meaning of ailing? It is important for us to understand these words. Ailing means something which is in poor state, poor health, poor condition, right? Weak. In our context, we're talking about it's a weak financial sector, which means a weak financial sector can very quickly what is the meaning of wreck? Wreck means destroy, correct? So the context is giving us a negative meaning. If that is the case, then I don't need this word render, no? It just is unnecessary there in the context. It's an inappropriate word choice which is not completing meaning. If I remove render, I can say an ailing financial sector, which is a poor financial sector, can very quickly destroy the entire economy. Are you following? The entire economy can crash because of an ailing financial sector, because of a poor financial sector, because of a weak financial sector. Right? So wreck means to crash, destroy, ruin, damage. Yeah? So that's our context. Exactly. So since the context is negative, render can also bring in a positive meaning. Right? It's not necessarily always it has to. Render is just a very generic word which means provide or give. Something happened because it made it possible, or it made it impossible, depending on what the context is. The context that I gave was negative, however, but render is not a negative word like wreck. But our context is negative, so the only word that we need there in part D is where the error is wreck and not render. Part D, we delete render. I don't need that word. So just to give render in a positive context, I can say Smita is rendering the book into English from French. So basically she's translating or whatever, right? Rendering means she's making it possible. She's basically translating the book from French to English. She's making something possible. So Smita is rendering the book into English from French. So I can't exclusively say that render is a negative word. It's a general word which means to make something possible or not make something possible. Cause to become. Yeah? Are you clear? Again, inappropriate word choice. Inappropriate word choice. Again, this is an incorrect, unnecessary vocabulary, I would say. Right? Again, falls under vocabulary. I need to identify, is this the word that I need in the context or not? Let's look at one more. Any modern poet would be thrilled to have his poems compared with Tulsidas. Where do you think the error is? Any modern poet would be thrilled to have his poems compared with Tulsidas. I'm going to give you 10 seconds, see if you're able to identify where the error is. So here, if you pay close attention, the error is in part D. Why? That's because there's comparison happening. But where is the comparison? Between what and what? The poems. Any modern poet would be thrilled to have his poems compared with, not Tulsidas, his poems compared with the poems of Tulsidas, right? Which means I need that clarity to come in. I need the proper, so this is like a dangling modifier, right? This is what we call a dangling modifier. What's a dangling modifier? Which means what I'm trying to modify, that subject is not clear in part D. His poems is what we're trying to compare with, and I'm not comparing. It's like saying if Bittu is a writer, right, and I'm also a writer, I want to compare my poems with Bittu's poems, not I want to compare my poems with Bittu. That is incorrect, no comparison. I can compare myself with Bittu, but my poems I want to compare with his poems, not with Bittu. That doesn't make sense. So this is where a dangling modifier. What is the meaning of dangling modifier? In fact, if you don't know this, I would advise you to go and check out dangling modifier, which is part of there in your basic grammar for reference as a concept. If you don't follow it, please go through that video. Where when I'm comparing, there's some part missing. The person whom I have to modify is dangling. Why? Because it's incomplete. I can't figure out. So part D is where the dangling modifier is. And what do I need to do there? I just have to add compared with those of Tulsidas. Those bringing in clarity, saying his poems. Are you following? So any modern poet would be thrilled to have his poems compared with those of Tulsidas. Those of matlab Tulsidas's poems. Error is in part D. You just add those of. So the construction will be compared with those of Tulsidas, bringing in clarity, saying those of matlab his poems. Whose poems? Tulsidas's poems. Let's look at the next one. The perception of animal life was even more ambiguous because of anthropomorphic characterizations of animal behavior. Some major scientific terms and all. But let's see if you're able to identify this. The perception of animal life was even more ambiguous because of anthropomorphic characterizations of animal behavior. Okay, so as much as we need to watch out for errors, we also need to know when to stop wasting time on a question and not look for an error. And if you look at that question, there is no error in that question actually. The perception of animal life was even more ambiguous, meaning not clear, a little confusing, because of what? Anthropomorphic characterizations of animal behavior. So this is an error-free question, no error. I'm sure you didn't expect one like this because we're specifically focusing on errors, but I just wanted to throw in one in between. So we also know when not to spend too much time on a question, and know that we need to move on. There's absolutely no error because yeah, it seems fine. It is correct. The perception of animal life, right? Being very specific. So the as a definite article is fine. Of what? Animal life was even more what? Ambiguous, unclear, not bringing in much clarity because of what? Anthropomorphic characterizations of animal behavior. This question is error free. Let's move on to the next one. The government's strategy to encourage entrepreneurship gathers momentum with unenvisaged response. What is the meaning of entrepreneurship? I hope you know that. And maybe you don't know the meaning of unvisaged as well. What do you think that is? First of all, an entrepreneur is somebody who runs his or her own business, right? It can be a small scale business that they've started, maybe at their house, and then they expand, they take it to the next level, whatever. Basically, as somebody who's able to start something on their own, a business of their own, right? That's an entrepreneur. It's their idea. It's their concept. They are the founders of it, right? From scratch. Are you following? So the government's strategy to encourage entrepreneurship gathers momentum with unenvisaged response. Meaning, what is the meaning of unenvisaged? Apply a little bit of context clues and tell me what do you think can be the meaning. Absolutely, it's an adjective. It's describing the response. What can it mean? So envisage means what? Okay, let's break it down, right? I'm sure it's the opposite of envisage. So what's the meaning of envisage then? To envisage something means it's almost like you predict it, you foresee it, right? I envisage. You can envisage anything. I can envisage that it's going to rain for the next 2 days, right? So you're saying that there is a possibility of something happening, usually a desirable event or a future. I envisage that we're going to have leave for the next 1 week. Yeah, I predict, I foresee, I expect, right? So unenvisage means the opposite of that, not visage. Yeah. So in the context, so we have a meaning, we have an understanding. The government's strategy to encourage entrepreneurship gathers momentum with unenvisaged response. So now where do you think the error is? So here the error actually is an error that we usually overlook, right? The context meaning is fine. In terms of construction, everything is fine, but the error is in part B. Did you identify the error? The error is our good old spelling error, which is nothing but entrepreneurship. How is it spelt? On. In fact, I think it's spelled correctly also. I thought it had ER, but it is spelled correctly. Entrepreneurship. This is also correct. So again, no error. No error in this question. I had a feeling that entrepreneurship was spelt incorrectly, but I'm saying there is a possibility of this being a spelling error where they can change the spelling. Instead of entre, they can say entrepreneurship, and this can pose as a spelling error as well. So it's good for us to look for these sort of spelling errors, also not to overlook them. Usually something that you would get in a SSC CGL question paper, not necessarily in an SBI PO question paper. You know what I mean? Because spellings are very basic, pretty common, and that's something that you would not see in a SBI PO paper, but definitely in an SSC CGL paper. Let's look at the last one. The significant feature is that none of the ancient Indian scientists claimed originality of their theories. Where do you think the error is? Were you able to identify the error in this question? The significant feature is that none of the ancient Indian scientists claimed originality of their theories. So if you pay attention, in the context is talking about some important thing, the significant, meaning the significant of something. What was that significant? None of the ancient Indian scientists claimed originality of their theories. So whatever is explained in the context, is it a future or a feature? Incorrect word choice, right? This is something again that you will clearly overlook if you don't understand the meaning of the context. The error is in part A. It's not future, it's a feature, right? What is a feature? What is a feature? Some sort of an aspect, right? An attribute. So the aspect here is that none of the ancient Indian scientists claimed originality of their theories. That is a feature and not a future. So the significant feature, again, it's an incorrect word choice. It's a vocabulary based error, something that we can easily overlook if we don't understand the meaning that the context is bringing. And also notice, even if you come back and say, why can't it be future? Look at the context. It's talking about something past, in the past tense, right? None of the ancient Indian scientists claimed originality of their theories. Something that happened in the past. How can it even be future? The significant feature is that this is what happened. The significant aspect is that this is what happened, right? So even if you're saying, hey, why not future? What's wrong with future? The context is talking about something that happened in the past, right? Error is in part A. You change future to feature. Let's look at this one. No method of making other people agree to your viewpoint is as effective as this method. No method of making other people agree to your viewpoint is as effective as this method. Where do you think the error is? I'm going to give you a clue for this one, okay? Remember, when there is not much clarity, there's comparison happening, right? How do I know that? Because I have the positive degree of comparison, as effective as this method, which means I need to look for a part which is not adding up to the complete meaning of this context. Which part is that? I need to add something because there's comparison happening. What and what is compared? And even the comparison, is there some word? There's always a word missing when you find that a part is, awkward or incomplete in meaning, because this is there is a dangling modifier. Something is missing. Can you identify which part, what is missing? Remember, what is compared? This method to, yes, the error is in part A. What do I need to add? All I have to do is just add no other method of making other people agree. Remember, what is compared here? Method is what? This method. So when I'm comparing, I'm saying there is no other method as compared to this method which is making other people agree to your viewpoint. So basically the context is saying, boss, if you want to make other people agree to your viewpoint, I'm telling you there is no other method than this method that you can use. Right? If I have to put this in context, I'll say, let me rephrase this whole thing. There is no other method than this method, or like in our context saying there is no other method as effective as this method of making people or making other people, whatever, agree to your viewpoint. Got it? There is no other method as effective as this method of making other people agree to your viewpoint. There is no other method than this method as effective as this method. In fact, you'd rather just go with this. As effective as this method of making other people agree to your viewpoint. So the error is in part A. All I need to do is add other, which completes meaning. Right? That other brings in the clarity of, okay, completing meaning of the subject method. Just like how we saw, right? Tulsidas's poems. I needed to add that those, because I'm comparing my poems with those of Tulsidas's, the poems of Tulsidas's. Just like that, I'm comparing this method to no other method. Yeah? Are you following? So the dangling modifier error, very, very difficult to identify. Errors pertaining to vocabulary, dangling modifiers, these are quite difficult to identify. Maybe we can look at more of this in our next session. But just so you have an idea of what to look for. Yeah, that brings us to the end of today's session. In fact, we've covered all the remaining 9 errors. Maybe we didn't look at, too many questions in each error, but we've pretty much covered all the 25 error types. Right? If you look at today itself we looked at 9 errors. We looked at word order, we looked at intensifiers, we looked at quantifiers, we looked at a possible error type which could be spelling, but I think it was more a typo. When you paste the context, if it's an incorrect word, it will give you that squiggly red line and then you correct it yourself. So there were spelling errors as well, which I pointed out, like entrepreneurship, right? That could be a possible spelling error. What else did we look at? We looked at superfluous meaning. We looked at dangling modifiers. Yeah. I think pretty much that was it. So we've looked at all the other error types as well. What I want you to do is ideally, go back and practice more on these errors. Oh, another one that we looked at was double negatives. So we've covered pretty much everything, right? So now that you are aware of, okay, these are all the possible type of errors, you just need more practice on these error types. Yeah. And I'll see you guys in our next session. Yeah. Take care. Have a nice week, guys.